It was a typical Friday afternoon in Spring Hollow, a quiet little town nestled between the rolling green hills of Wyoming. The sun was casting long golden shadows through the chestnut trees, stretching across the dusty road leading to Rusty Jack's garage, where I, Ethan Hayes, spent my days from dawn till dusk. At 27, with my fair skin often smudged with grease and my hands calloused from years of wrenching, I didn't have any fancy engineering degree. Just a knack for listening to machines the way some folks listen to people. If you paid close enough attention, they'd tell you exactly what they needed. I was knee-deep in replacing the brake pads on an old pickup truck when I heard the unfamiliar rumble of a high-end engine cutting through the peaceful hum of the countryside. A sleek Mercedes GLC, coated in a fine layer of red dust from the back roads, screeched to a halt right in front of the garage. The door swung open and out stepped a woman who looked like she belonged in a glossy city magazine, not out here in the middle of nowhere. She was Sophia Reynolds, 29, the newcomer who'd just moved into the old house up on Willow Hill. I'd heard whispers about her, some city girl escaping the hustle, or so the gossip went. She was dressed in a slate blue dress that hugged her figure just right, with Prada sunglasses perched on her nose and high heels that were already picking up specks of dirt. Her expression screamed, "I don't plan on staying long." She stood there, about 2 meters away from me, scanning the garage with a wary eye before cutting straight to the point. "My car's got a loose exhaust pipe. Can you fix it?" she asked, her voice clipped and efficient, like she was used to giving orders in boardrooms. I wiped my hands on an old oil rag and walked over, crouching down to inspect the undercarriage. It was a straightforward issue, nothing a quick patch couldn't handle for now. About 15 minutes if I remove the damaged section and secure it temporarily with a clamp. It won't be perfect, but it'll get you home safely. She let out a half smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes, laced with sarcasm. This place can handle a Mercedes? It doesn't even look better than the rundown gas station I just passed. Her words hung in the air like exhaust fumes, but I didn't bite. I'd heard worse from folks who thought their fancy rides made them superior. I just nodded, turned back to my toolbox, slipped on my gloves, and got to work without another word. The garage was my domain. Rusty tools, oil stains, and the faint smell of gasoline mixed with earth. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Sophia rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed, and climbed back into her car. She hit the ignition, probably intending to drive off and find somewhere better. But the engine whined, sputtered, and died. She tried again. Nothing. Dead silence except for the wind rustling the leaves outside. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, and I could see the frustration building as dust swirled around the tires. The cool facade cracked just a bit. She stepped out again, her heels sinking slightly into the gravel, and tapped her red-painted nails, slightly chipped now, against the garage frame. "You can try fixing it, but don't make it worse." I paused, looking up at her for a few seconds. Her eyes met mine, sharp and guarded, like she was sizing me up not just as a mechanic, but as someone beneath her notice. I nodded slowly. I've never wrecked anything that someone else hadn't already broken first. The words slipped out before I could stop them, hanging between us like a challenge. She flinched just barely, her lips parting as if to retort, but she held back. Instead, she retreated to the shaded overhang of the garage, where the sun slanted through the gaps in the worn-out roof. The air felt thicker now, charged with that unspoken collision. Me in my grease-stained overalls, her in her designer getup, two worlds brushing against each other in the most awkward way. I jacked up the car with the manual lift, the creak of metal echoing in the quiet afternoon. The clock on the wall ticked forward, marking those promised 15 minutes. Tools clanged as I worked, loosening bolts and assessing the damage. It was more than just a loose pipe. There was a small crack that explained the sudden failure. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her pacing slightly, arms crossed, glancing at her phone every few seconds as if willing a signal to appear in this dead zone. The garage wasn't much to look at. Stacks of tires in the corner, shelves cluttered with parts, and the faint hum of a radio playing old country tunes in the background. But it was my space, where I fixed what was broken without judgment. Sophia, though, seemed to judge everything. The dusty floor, the flickering fluorescent light, even the way I methodically tightened each clamp. As the minutes ticked by, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of impending rain from the hills. I finished securing the temporary fix, wiped down the tools, and lowered the car. All set. Should hold until you get to a bigger shop if you want a full replacement. She approached cautiously, inspecting my work with a skeptical eye. That was faster than I expected. There was a hint of surprise in her voice, maybe even reluctant approval, but the edge of disdain lingered. I shrugged, stripping off my gloves. Like I said, 15 minutes. I handed her the keys, our fingers brushing for the briefest second. She pulled back quickly as if the contact was unexpected. Sophia climbed in, started the engine, it purred smoothly this time, and drove off without another word, leaving a trail of dust in her wake. I stood there watching her taillights disappear up the hill, wondering why her mocking tone had stuck with me more than it should. Little did I know that brief encounter was just the spark of something neither of us saw coming. A connection forged in the unlikeliest of places, starting with a look of contempt and a reluctant fix. But as I turned back to the pickup truck, the sky darkened, and the first drops of rain began to fall. It felt like the universe was hinting at more to come. As the dust from Sophia's Mercedes settled on the gravel, I shook my head and turned back to the pickup truck, wiping the sweat from my brow. The sky had darkened quicker than I'd expected, heavy clouds rolling in from the hills like an uninvited guest. The first fat raindrops splattered against the roof, turning the dry earth into a muddy slurry within minutes. I ducked inside the garage, flipping on the overhead lights as the downpour intensified, the tin roof rattling like a drum under the assault. I figured that was the end of it. Another city slicker passing through, judging the place and moving on. But not 5 minutes later, I heard the screech of tires again, followed by the unmistakable sound of an engine struggling through the muck. Through the sheets of rain, I saw the Mercedes pulling back up, its headlights cutting through the gray haze. Sophia jumped out, shielding her head with her purse as she dashed toward the overhang, her dress already soaked and clinging to her skin. "Damn it!" she muttered, shaking off the water like a cat. She looked at me, a mix of frustration and embarrassment in her eyes. "The road's turning into a river. I can't see 2 feet ahead." I nodded, not surprised. These summer storms hit hard and fast out here, washing out the dirt paths in no time. "You're welcome to wait it out. Could be a while." She hesitated, glancing back at her car as if debating whether to brave it anyway. But the rain was coming down in buckets now, thunder rumbling in the distance. With a sigh, she stepped further under the shelter, wringing out the hem of her dress. The garage felt smaller with her in it, her perfume mixing with the scent of oil and wet earth, a stark contrast to the usual grease and exhaust. That's when the guys started filtering in from the back room. We'd all been wrapping up for the day, but the storm had us hunkered down. First came Alex, the fast talker of the bunch, wiping his hands on his jeans as he eyed the newcomer. "Whoa, looks like we're hosting royalty today?" he quipped, flashing a grin that was half joke, half genuine. Ben followed, his sharp eyes taking in the scene without a word, cool and observant as always, like he was sizing up a tricky engine. Chris sauntered in next, chuckling to himself. "Storm's got everyone trapped. You hungry, miss? We got some sandwiches stashed." And Dylan, the quiet one, hung back by the toolbox, offering a shy nod but staying out of the spotlight. We were a ragtag crew, me leading the pack with my steady hands, Alex cracking wise to keep things light, Ben providing that quiet strength, Chris always ready with a laugh or a helping hand, and Dylan observing from the edges, speaking only when it mattered. We'd been working together for years, brothers in grease if not by blood. But right now, with Sophia standing there dripping wet, the usual banter died down. No one wanted to make her feel more out of place than she already did. I kept working on a loose bolt from earlier, giving her space, but the rain showed no signs of letting up. The roof pounded relentlessly, water pooling in the gravel outside. Sophia shifted uncomfortably, her high heels sinking into the soft spots on the concrete floor. After a few awkward minutes, I glanced over. "There's some benches over there if you want to sit. And we've got sandwiches and apple cider in the cooler. Nothing fancy, but it'll tide you over." She paused, her guarded expression softening just a fraction. "I'm not hungry," she said, but her voice lacked the earlier bite. Still, she moved toward the old oil drum we used as a makeshift seat, perching on the edge like she might bolt at any second. Dylan, without a word, grabbed a small towel from the shelf and handed it to her. She took it, murmuring a quiet, "thanks," and dabbed at her face and arms. The guys exchanged glances but didn't push. Chris pulled out the cooler anyway, rummaging through it. Well, if you change your mind, we've got ham and cheese on rye. Made 'em this morning. He passed one to Alex, who tore into it without ceremony. Ben leaned against the wall, sipping from a thermos, his eyes flicking between the storm and Sophia. The air filled with the casual sounds of us unwrapping food, the rain providing a steady backdrop. Sophia watched us for a moment, her posture rigid at first. But as the minutes ticked by and the conversation stayed light, Alex joking about a botched repair from last week, Chris laughing about the time we got stuck in mud ourselves, something shifted. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small container. I have some salad and fruit if anyone wants to share. It was an olive branch, hesitant but there. We took her up on it. Chris grabbed a forkful of her salad, nodding appreciatively. Not bad for city food. Ben passed her a cup of apple cider, warm from the thermos. Dylan finally spoke up, his voice soft. Storms like this usually pass in an hour. I sat nearby, munching on a sandwich, stealing glances at her. The rain drummed on, isolating us in this bubble of shared shelter. As we ate, the barriers cracked further. Sophia didn't say much at first, but when Alex asked about her move to town, she opened up a little. The city was too loud, needed a change. Her tone was guarded, but there was a vulnerability underneath, like the storm had washed away some of her armor. We shared stories in return, me about fixing tractors for farmers who'd known my family forever, Ben about the quiet satisfaction of making something broken run smooth again. Chris kept it light with jokes. Dylan nodded along, adding a quiet comment here and there. The meal wasn't planned, just a haphazard sharing of whatever we had. My sandwich, her salad, the cider circulating in mismatched cups. Laughter bubbled up unexpectedly when Alex spilled mustard on his shirt, and even Sophia cracked a small smile. The rain eased slightly, but we lingered, the conversation flowing easier now. For the first time, her eyes lost that edge of contempt, replaced by something curious, maybe even grateful. When the downpour finally tapered off, I checked her car one last time. Should be good now. She stood, brushing off her dress, and turned to us. Thanks for the food and waiting out the storm. We nodded, no big deal. She drove away again, but this time she glanced back in the rearview mirror. As the guys cleaned up, I couldn't shake the feeling that the rain had washed in more than just mud. It had started something unspoken, a bridge between her world and ours. The day after the storm felt like the town had hit a reset button. The sun was out again, drying up the puddles and turning the air crisp with that fresh post-rain scent. I woke up early, as usual, brewing a pot of coffee in my small apartment above the garage. Spring Hollow was the kind of place where news traveled faster than a pickup on the highway. Whispers in the diner, chit-chat at the feed store, everyone knowing everyone else's business. I didn't think much of our impromptu meal with Sophia until I headed to the barbershop for a quick trim. Old Mr. Harlan was clipping away at someone's hair when I walked in, the bell jingling above the door. The place smelled like aftershave and stale coffee, with a couple of locals flipping through magazines. As soon as I sat down, Harlan grinned at me in the mirror. Heard you boys had company yesterday during the storm. That city girl from Willow Hill, eating sandwiches with the likes of you grease monkeys? Must have been some kind of miracle. I chuckled, playing it cool, but inside I felt a twinge of annoyance. Just waiting out the rain, Harlan? Nothing special. But the other guys in the shop jumped in, ribbing me with laughs and questions. She's slumming it or what? Bet she never touched a ham sandwich before yesterday. The gossip was already spinning, turning a simple act of shelter into something juicy. I kept my answers short, but it stuck with me. How quick people were to judge, to turn nothing into something. By lunchtime, I swung by the local coffee shop, a cozy spot called Hollow Brew, with checkered tablecloths and the best black coffee in town. I needed a pick-me-up before heading back to the garage. As I pushed open the door, the aroma of fresh grounds hit me, and there she was, Sophia, standing at the counter ordering an iced latte. She looked put together again, her hair dry and styled, dress wrinkle-free like the storm had never happened. Our eyes met for a split second, and she gave a polite nod, but nothing more. I ordered my coffee and found a table in the corner, but before I could sit, a couple of regulars at the next booth leaned over. One of them, a farmer named Jed, whistled low. Ethan, boy, what's the spell you cast on that fancy lady up on the hill? Whole town's buzzing about her, hunkering down at your garage. His buddy laughed, adding, Bet she ain't used to roughing it with you lot. Sophia must have heard because she turned slightly, her expression neutral, like she was above it all. She didn't smile, didn't acknowledge the comments, just paid for her drink and headed for the door. But as she passed my table, her eyes flicked to mine again. A silent question, or maybe just acknowledgement. I nodded back, keeping it casual, but inside I wondered if the gossip bothered her as much as it was starting to irk me. From that day on, she seemed to avoid us. I'd see her car taking the longer route around town, bypassing the garage even though it was the quickest path to Willow Hill. It made sense. She was from the city, probably didn't want to be associated with a bunch of small-town mechanics. I didn't blame her. We'd crossed paths by accident, and now the town was turning it into entertainment. But I couldn't shake it off. Every afternoon, after closing up shop, I'd wander out to the field across from the garage, pretending to clear weeds or check fences, my eyes drifting up to that old house on the hill. The lights would come on at dusk, a warm glow against the darkening sky, and I'd wonder what her story was, why she'd come here, of all places. A week or so later, the heat wave hit hard, the sun baking the earth like an oven. I was out on a call fixing a tractor for a neighbor. When I spotted her Mercedes pulled over on the side of the dusty road, hood popped open. Sophia was there, fanning herself with a map, looking frustrated as she poked at the engine. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her dress sticking to her in the sweltering air. Before I could even think about it, Chris's truck pulled up behind her. He must have been driving back from a parts run. He hopped out without a word, toolbox in hand, and started inspecting the issue. Sophia straightened up, surprise flashing across her face. I can call a tow, she started, but Chris just shook his head. No need, looks like a loose battery cable. Won't take but a minute. She sighed, wiping her brow, about to say something else when Ben's Jeep rolled up next. He parked and joined Chris under the hood, his quiet efficiency kicking in. Dylan wasn't far behind, pulling over with a cooler in his passenger seat. He handed her a bottle of water without fanfare. You need this. Sophia stood there, bottle in hand, looking at us like we'd appeared out of thin air. The sun beat down relentlessly, heat waves shimmering off the asphalt. Why do you all keep showing up whenever I'm not okay? She asked, her voice softer than before, laced with genuine confusion. I arrived last, having wrapped up my call and spotted the commotion on my way back. I wiped my hands on my jeans and stepped forward. Because we've been there, feeling like you don't belong, like people look at you and see something that shouldn't be. The words came out steady, echoing what I'd felt since our first encounter. We got to work, no questions asked. Chris tightened the cable, Ben checked the fluids, Dylan stood by with more water, and I tested the ignition. The engine roared back to life, smooth as silk. Sophia watched the whole time, her expression shifting from wary to something almost grateful. I don't know what to say, she admitted as we packed up. You don't have to, Ben replied, his voice even. Just drive safe. She nodded, climbing back in, but before pulling away, she rolled down the window. Thanks, again. And just like that, she was gone, leaving us in the dust. The rumors kept swirling after that. Folks at the diner speculating about that city girl and the garage boys, turning every glance into a story. But we didn't let it faze us. Instead, the encounters became more frequent, almost natural. Alex dropped off a pie at her house one evening, claiming it was extra from the shop. Ben fixed a loose fence post on her property when he happened to be driving by. Dylan left a note with tips on handling the hill roads in winter. For me, the questions gnawed deeper. Why had she been so dismissive at first? What made her walls so high? And on her end, I imagined she wondered why we didn't pry. Why we showed up without expecting anything in return. We never voiced them aloud, no need. Our presence, quiet and steady, was slowly bridging the gap, eroding the distance one small act at a time. The town talked, but we didn't care. Something real was building, unspoken and unhurried. One night, a few weeks after the rumors had simmered down but not quite died out, I couldn't sleep. The air in my apartment felt stuffy, the kind of humid Wyoming night that presses down on you like a weight. I was sitting in my truck outside the garage, flipping through an old mechanic's manual under the dim cab light, when I noticed something off up on Willow Hill. Sophia's house lights were blazing at an odd hour, well past midnight, and there was an unfamiliar car parked crookedly in her driveway, its headlights still on, cutting harsh beams through the darkness. A low rumble of unease settled in my gut. I'd seen her place dark and quiet most nights, a solitary glow from a single window. But this felt wrong. Then I heard it, dogs barking fiercely from somewhere nearby, followed by a man's voice shouting, slurred and angry. "Sophia, get out here! You think you can hide in this backwater dump and I won't find you?" I didn't think twice. I fired up the engine and sped up the hill, gravel crunching under my tires. By the time I pulled up, the scene was escalating. The man, tall, disheveled, reeking of booze, was pounding on her door, his fists echoing like thunder. The dogs in the neighboring yards were going wild, adding to the chaos. I jumped out, heart pounding, and positioned myself between him and the house. "Back off," I said, my voice steady but firm. "You're done here." He turned, eyes bloodshot and wild, sneering at me like I was nothing. "Who the hell are you? Her little country boy toy?" But before I could respond, headlights flashed behind me, Alex's truck screeching to a halt, followed by Ben's Jeep and Chris's old sedan. They piled out fast, Alex cracking his knuckles, Ben stepping up silently with that intense stare of his, Chris gripping a baseball bat from his trunk like it was an extension of his arm, and Dylan hanging back but ready, his quiet demeanor hiding a fierce loyalty. The guy sized us up, 5 of us now standing shoulder to shoulder in the dim porch light, and his bravado cracked. "This ain't your business," he snarled, but there was hesitation in his step as he backed toward his car. Chris tapped the bat against his palm. "It is now. Leave, or we call the cops. And trust me, Sheriff Knowles owes us a few favors." He spat on the ground, muttering curses, but climbed into his car and peeled out, tires spinning on the wet grass from an earlier sprinkle. We watched until his taillights vanished down the hill, the night falling silent again except for the distant howls fading away. The door creaked open behind us, and there was Sophia, trembling in the threshold, her face pale under the porch light. She was in a simple robe, hair tousled, eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. You didn't have to," she whispered, but her voice broke. I stepped inside first, the others hanging back on the porch like silent guardians. The house smelled of lavender and old wood, a far cry from the grease of the garage. She was shaking, arms wrapped around herself, so I grabbed a blanket from the nearby couch and draped it over her shoulders, my hand lingering just a moment to steady her. "You're safe now," I said softly, guiding her to sit. She looked up at me, tears welling but not yet falling, her guard completely down for the first time. "I didn't come here to rest. I came to hide. He was someone I loved once and feared. I needed a fresh start, even if just for a few peaceful days." I sat across from her, not pushing, just listening. Dylan slipped in quietly with a mug of tea he'd brewed from her kitchen, chamomile, steaming gently, and set it on the table. She took it with both hands, the warmth seeming to ground her as the first tears slipped down her cheeks. "Thank you," she murmured, not just to me, but to all of us. Outside, Alex, Ben, and Chris stood watch, their silhouettes dark against the night, like trees buffering a storm. No one asked for details right then, no prying questions, no pitying looks. We just let her be, the silence filled only by the occasional creak of the house settling and the distant rumble of thunder far off. The next morning, we were back at her place at dawn, tools in hand. Chris reinforced the door locks with heavy-duty bolts. Ben installed motion sensor lights around the perimeter, wiring them up with that meticulous focus of his. Alex tested the alarm system she'd mentioned having but never set up, cracking jokes to lighten the mood. "This'll scare off anything bigger than a raccoon." Dylan checked the windows, sealing any gaps, his quiet efficiency speaking volumes. As we worked, Sophia opened up more, piece by piece. Over coffee on her porch, she told us about her life in the city, the controlling ex who'd turned possessive, the fear that drove her to pack up and flee to this quiet corner of Wyoming. "I thought I could outrun it," she said, staring at the hills, "but shadows follow you, don't they?" We shared our own stories in return, not to one-up her, but to connect. I talked about growing up in Spring Hollow, losing my folks young and scraping by with the garage as my anchor. Ben opened up about his time in the military, the invisible scars that made him value silence. Chris laughed off his failed marriage, saying, "Sometimes you fix what's broken, sometimes you just drive on." Alex kept it light with tales of botched jobs that taught us resilience, and Dylan, in his few words, admitted to feeling like an outsider until we formed our crew. By afternoon, the house was fortified, but more than that, she'd let us in, not just through the door, but into her world. As we packed up, she stood there, blanket still draped over her like a shield. "I don't know how to repay this," she said. "You don't have to," I replied, echoing what we'd said before. But as I drove away with the guys, I realized something profound. That outstretched hand in the dark, hours to her, had pulled her from isolation. No promises needed, just actions that spoke louder than words. It wasn't pity, it was solidarity, the kind that binds people without labels. And in that moment, our ragtag group felt less like mechanics and more like a quiet force, ready for whatever came next. Fall came to Spring Hollow like a gentle sigh, the hills turning shades of amber and rust as the air cooled and the leaves crunched underfoot. The storms of summer felt like a distant memory, replaced by crisp mornings and early sunsets that painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges. I'd find myself driving up Willow Hill more often, not for repairs, but just to check in, though I'd never admit it was more than that. Sophia's house had transformed over those weeks. The fear from that night had faded, but the bond we'd forged in the darkness lingered, unspoken and steady. One weekend, she surprised us all by opening her little shop, Hilltop Haven, right on the edge of her property. It was a cozy setup in the old barn she'd renovated, a place selling handmade pottery, beeswax candles, and her own hand-roasted coffee blends. The grand opening was nothing flashy. A few signs along the road, some balloons tied to the fence, and the scent of fresh brew wafting down the hill. Word spread quick in town, and folks trickled in, curious about the city girl who'd turned recluse into entrepreneur. Every morning, she'd have 6 cups ready, 5 for us garage guys and 1 for herself. I'd show up first, usually before the sun fully crested the hills, the dew still sparkling on the grass. I'd place a small trinket on her counter, a twisted piece of scrap metal I'd shaped into a flower during downtime at the shop, or a polished bolt I'd turned into a keychain. "Morning gift," I'd say with a shrug, and she'd smile that quiet smile, tucking it away like it meant something. Ben would roll in next, his Jeep rumbling up the drive. He'd lean on the counter, eyeing the pastries she'd started baking. "We're loyal customers, and we haven't even gotten a cheek kiss from the owner yet," he'd tease, his sharp eyes twinkling with that rare humor of his. Sophia would laugh lightly, a sound that had become more frequent, less guarded. "Keep bringing those stories, and maybe one day," she'd reply, pouring him a steaming mug. Chris and Alex would arrive together, Chris with his easy grin, and Alex firing off jokes about the latest town gossip. "Heard Jed's tractor broke again. Bet he wishes he had a crew like us," Alex would say, winking at Sophia as he grabbed his coffee. Dylan, always the last, would slip in quietly, accepting his cup with a nod and a murmured thanks. His presence a steady anchor without needing words. Afternoons were for the porch. She'd set out 6 chairs on the wide veranda overlooking the valley, one always empty right next to hers, even if no one claimed it that day. We'd wander up after closing the garage, sometimes with tools to fix a creaky step or tighten a loose railing, other times just to sit and watch the sun dip low. The conversations flowed easy, Ben sharing tips on her garden, Chris recounting funny customer mishaps, Alex debating the best fishing spots. Dylan would listen, occasionally adding a thoughtful comment that cut right to the heart of things. I'd sit nearby, content to watch her relax into the rhythm of it all. One crisp evening, as the leaves swirled in the breeze, a tourist couple stopped by the shop late. They bought a candle and some coffee, chatting with Sophia about the town. As they left, the woman turned back with a curious smile. "Those 5 guys who come around so often, what are they to you, boyfriends, brothers?" Sophia paused, her eyes flicking to us scattered on the porch, me whittling a piece of wood, the others laughing over a shared joke. She smiled softly, that enigmatic curve of her lips we'd all come to know. "They're the ones who never asked where I came from, but still show up with apple pie every Friday." We didn't label it. No one called us her protectors or friends or anything more. It wasn't about titles. It was about showing up. We'd share meals, her fresh salads mixed with our hearty sandwiches, fix things around her place without being asked, walk the hills together spotting deer or just enjoying the silence. The town still whispered, but it didn't matter. Our presence was the glue, quiet and unwavering. In those moments, as the seasons shifted and life settled into a new normal, I realized the peace we'd found didn't come from naming what we had. It came from hands extended without questions, from being there when it counted most. People stayed not because of promises, but because of the everyday actions. The silent support, the shared cups of coffee, the way we filled the empty spaces in each other's lives without demanding definitions. And in that, we built something real, something that didn't need words to endure.